All right. Hey guys, and welcome to this episode. So this week, I wanted to start the week off by talking about creating change in our lives. And so, as we've ventured into this new year, many of us start resolutions, and we're starting. This is going to be the year that X, Y, and Z happens. And then slowly and surely, we kind of start seeing ourselves fall back into our old routines, and that's why I think some crazy percent of people give up on their resolutions by I think January 21st, right? Like 3 weeks in. So I want to talk about the idea of change. And, when we're talking about creating change in our life, really what that takes to be successful, you know? So and for those of you that are new to the show, we really would appreciate your support by liking and subscribing and sharing this with others, so that it'll help not only our rankings, but also just really getting this information out to people. So today, let's talk about change, and I want to talk about just one facet of change that most people just never consider, and it's your story. Now, so what do I mean by that? When it comes to different modalities of therapy, there's a therapy that really I want to talk about, and it's called the idea of narrative therapy. And what we're talking about here is your inner narrative, your inner story that causes the operation for everything else you do. See, most of us, we have these stories. I mean, all of us have these stories, and some I like to call them beliefs, right? And it's a formulation of just how we perceive the world, what we believe about the world. And when it comes to stories, what very many of us don't realize, and myself included, is just because we have a story doesn't mean it's true. It just means that it's our story. And when it comes to, last week I did an episode on how many of us are just feeling connected and depleted. And one of the reasons that I think that's true for many of us is because we are all operating from there's no unification in story. There's no unification on which we're operating from. Right? We've been divided, right? And in so many facets, not just family, but organizations, politically, medically, right? I mean, there's so much division. I mean, not to mention culturally and racially, right? I mean, the division that is going on, especially in the United States, is crazy, and the division, what causes that division is story. It's story. It's just how you choose to what you say to yourself about the world, about a certain topic, about an idea. That is what your story is. And the number one thing that we do, and this is the number one, I'd say, mistake that we all make to some degree, is that because we have a story in our mind, we automatically assume it's right. And then what we try to do is to get other people to adopt our story, and obviously you can see the conflict, because then we impose our stories on other people and we try to make them fit the mold of how we think things should be. And this is why so many people have such a hard time with change, is because instead of asking ourselves about our story and stuff, what we do is we assume our story's right. We assume that we want this change and it's the right thing to happen. Then we try to make the world that way, right? We try to control everything outside of us to make the world fit our story. And if people don't fit that story, then we, take other action, right? And in many ways in our society now, we cancel people, right? Or we stop talking to them. And when it comes to real change, especially when we're talking about things like anxiety, OCD, psychological stress, and recovery, and we're talking about making real change, one of the things that very few people ever consider, but at the same time holds so much weight in our success, is our story. Now, I talk a lot about belief structure in my programs, right? And this is like some of the most fascinating and foundational and transformational work that I think you can do as an individual. But really, identifying and sitting with yourself and looking at your beliefs and and really restructuring your beliefs. See, so many people, we operate from these incredibly limiting beliefs. And I know I do still, right? And part of my continuous work on myself is checking out my narrative, like really looking at my narrative, my belief structures, because your beliefs drive your behavior. And so if we ever want a behavior change, we have to start with belief. We have to start with our story. What is the story that is driving the behavior that I'm doing, that is giving me the result that I'm getting that I don't like? Because if you're looking for change in the world, obviously you're trying to change something you don't like. And instead of just operating from that, ask yourself, well, what's the story I have about why I don't like that? What's the story that I have about why I'm doing the things that are causing that? And if we really start to deconstruct ourselves, the great part is that you start to look at things that you actually can change. And one of the number one things we can change is our stories, is our belief structures. And when you talk about making radical change in your life, that will actually last, right? Not just committing to some resolution and giving up on it 2 weeks in because you haven't had any success. I'm talking about making like radical change in your life. Like if this is the year that you decide, you know what, I'm going to conquer my fear that's been holding a grip onto me for 20 years. Okay. How do you do that? Yes, you need tools and you need strategies, yes, but beyond all that, you need the correct story. See, if you go into a change, let's say someone was going to quit smoking and they're operating from this story that it's impossible to quit smoking. I mean, do you think they're going to be successful? If you're operating from that's narrative in your mind that something's impossible and then you try to do it, well, you're always going to fall back to your story. So if you ever want to know what someone really believes, watch their behavior. Because a person cannot consistently go against their internal story and their internal beliefs over time. They might be able to do it for a meeting or, a few days or whatever, but they'll always fall back to their story. So for instance, a good example would be, and again, I'm just going to use COVID here because it's such a relevant topic and it's current, right? And so, it's, again, I'm not a virologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not telling you how to operate, but here's things that we're seeing that are really happening. And this is kind of to articulate my point. So there are people that are guiding other people and trying to set rules for other people and would say things like, well, you shouldn't travel, or you should always wear a mask. And then, we'll see them, right, in traveling to other states, not wearing masks and just openly like operating from a carefree approach. They will say one thing to the public and then do something totally different in their own personal life. And what's interesting about that is their behavior shows what they really believe, right? And so, like, a good example is I was just walking the other day, yesterday, and I see this person driving in their car with a mask on by themselves, and I asked myself, right, it's such a good demonstration of just kind of like when it comes from a mental health perspective and an anxiety and fear perspective, how COVID has impacted us is, look, it's pretty clear and safe to say that you can't get COVID by driving in your car by yourself, right? That's not how it works. Okay. So driving with a mask on by yourself is not doing anything to keep you safe, right? And again, I'm not making any crazy claims here. I mean, that's pretty evident, right? That's factual statement right there. And so when we talk about the story that drives that behavior, I mean, that's such a story of fear. That is a story of fear. And this is the problem with, especially with things like COVID, is we have polarizing stories that everyone else is operating from. And if someone doesn't operate from your story, we just shut everyone out. See, the only way that we're ever going to be able to create any sense of unity is to start to two things. Number one is to be able to even challenge our own story. Okay. to take a step back and say, you know what, this is my story. And to be even able to ask yourself, is this story, is this how I want to keep operating? Is this a story that I want to continue with? Being able to question your own story. And the other is to be able to listen to other people's stories. See, like if we ever want to achieve connection and unity again, it's going to come back down to story. It's going to be able to have respect for other people's stories. It's going to be able to have, and also challenge our own, right? Because again, this is, and realizing that where we get our stories is important too, right? And this is, so in story, it is such a fascinating topic. Story and narrative is the catalyst to change. And when you can implant, stories into people's minds, like that's what drives mass behavior. So as individuals, when it comes to making big change in our life, the key to long-term change is identifying and changing your stories that are limiting you from making that change. See, anything's possible in life. When you talk about recovery from OCD and anxiety, it's absolutely possible. I've seen people do it. I've gone through the process myself. You really can heal, right? Like healing is possible, right? Neuroplasticity, right? The brain can rewire and mold. It's amazing what is actually achievable in this world. But it's going to start and end with your story. And because that's what's going to drive your behavior, which is going to drive your results. Okay. And I want to try to help see that larger picture, because again, like I said, if you ever want to see what someone really believes, watch what they do. That person that was driving with the mask on in the car, they really believe that they're in danger, right? That fear is real. That fear is driving that behavior. But again, they haven't always believed that because they haven't always done that. This is a new thing, and this is why, instead of looking at people's behavior and trying to change it and getting upset with it, ask yourself, okay, like, what's the story that's driving that? What's the story that's driving that? Even with yourself, instead of getting upset that maybe you're not reaching a change that you want to reach or achieving a goal you want to achieve, ask yourself, are there stories that are holding me back? What's the narrative that's going on in my mind? See, when you just assume what's going on in your mind, or that story in your mind is true, you're just going to operate from that continuously. The most empowering thing you could understand about yourself is that you have the power to choose what to believe, to choose the story to tell yourself. And if you're operating from a story that's limiting you or holding you back or sabotaging you, you have the ability and the power to change that story. That's like the most amazing thing about story and belief. And again, we walk through that process and taking back control, right? And we show you our points of how to do that. But it starts with even becoming aware of what your story is. That's the first place we have to start, is what is my story that I'm operating from? And sometimes drawing it out on paper and writing it out, or just even kind of putting on what's going in your head onto paper, like I talked about journaling last week. That's how we start to become aware of our story. And then we can start to challenge our story. And we can start to rewrite it. And if you want to talk about creating change, not like, yes, in the world, sure. If you want to talk about creating mass change in the world, we have to understand story. But the way that we create change in the world is by creating change in ourselves first. And in order to do that, we have to really model what needs to happen. And the way to do that is to start with our stories, and then, and definitely start to look at the stories that we have defaulted to, right? The ones that we never question, and to really go into those stories and to start asking ourselves, okay, like, what's the story I'm operating from? Is this a story I want to continue operating from? And to start changing the stories that will then change behavior, that will then get us different results in our life. So I just wanted to share that idea today, because the power of story is incredible from both ends, right? And I'm not saying that I subscribe to one story over the other, but what I am saying is that in order to start getting, to start rebuilding our lives and the things that have been impacted over the last 2 years, we're going to have to, as individuals, have to be able to challenge our own stories and to listen to other people's stories. And we're going to be able to have to reach a common ground, and really unify together. And that's something that I just think is so important that not a lot of people are talking about. So I felt inspired today to talk about that and talk about just the power of story and how we actually have the ability to control and change our own stories. And that is what will lead to any kind of change that we want to achieve in our life, is really operating from story first, and letting that dictate the rest. So thank you so much for hanging out today, and I hope you found this valuable. Again, we have resources for you over at Restored Minds. In fact, I have some links right down in the notes that will help you with whether it's a guide or some of our trainings, as well as our program. So please check those out. If you're currently wrestling with anything, we're here to support you. And with that said, I wish you guys an amazing week, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care. Thank you so much for watching that video. And so if you're struggling with OCD and anxiety, I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training for you over at Restored Minds, where you can start learning how to use our AAA response to really break out of that loop and ultimately take back control of your life. And all you need to do to access is just click the little link below, and you'll be taken to a page where you can register today. Thank you so much.